The F-111 streaked through the sky, a menacing spectacle of combat aviation. Levelling its wings, the undercarriage bristled with surveillance sensors. In the cockpit, a Royal Australian Air Force pilot and systems operator both diligently searched for their target.
At IP.
Pushing. Alpha check.
3 nautical miles, vector 320.
Bird dog.
A firm looking. Contact. Captured.
Spade. Mission complete RTB.
But this was not the tundra of the Soviet Union, nor was their objective a Cold War missile silo. This was Australia, and their target, the Franklin Dam, in the vast and isolated wilderness of Tasmania. How did it come to this? In 1978, the Tasmanian Hydroelectric Commission proposed building a dam on the Franklin River to generate hydroelectric power. While polarising, the project promised jobs and industrial growth to a region struggling economically.
You're wrong!
But there was a problem. A big fat green one. With the introduction of the dam, the Franklin River was at risk of being submerged. The surrounding area was rich in biodiversity and cultural heritage, including historical indigenous sites. It was estimated the proposed dam would flood over 50 kilometres of pristine wilderness. As news of the dam spread, so did public opposition. In mid-1980, approximately 10,000 people protested in the streets of Hobart, demanding the state government cease construction of the dam. At the time, this was the largest public gathering in the history of the state. This was becoming a big deal. Despite the public opinion and protesting for and against, the decision remained in a deadlock, with the state parliament unable to reach an agreement between the key parties. What to do? A genius idea emerges. A state referendum. The public should decide the outcome of the dam. In December 1981, the state government gave people an opportunity to have their say. The poll provided two options: yes to the Franklin River Dam, or yes to the Franklin River Dam. In an attempt at compromising, Labor Premier Doug Lowe had suggested an alternate location, which would allegedly have a lesser environmental impact. This compromise did not sit well with the environmental groups, who simply wrote "no dams" on their ballot papers. The polling showed 47% in favour of the original dam, with 8% in favour of the alternative, and 45% tallied as informal votes on account of the added third option. The polling debacle caused a shake-up in the state government, with Doug Lowe being sacked and replaced with Harry Holgate. Not long after, the Australian Democrats Party filed a motion of no confidence and demanded a state election. In May 1982, the somewhat pro-dam Holgate Labor government was defeated by the staunchly pro-dam Liberal Party. Under the leadership of Robin Gray, the ruling party immediately passed the required legislation required for the dam to proceed. In a further act of defiance, Premier Gray strongly warned the federal government against becoming involved, going as far as threatening to secede from Australia if they intervened. Slowly but surely, the dam became a national issue, as rallies and protests garnered support around the country. The now iconic "No Dam" stickers were printed and disseminated.
What the fuck is that? I cleared tray 3.
Then leader of the Tasmanian Wilderness Society, Bob Brown, led a vocal anti-dam campaign, drumming up national support in an attempt to persuade the Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser to intervene. The campaign was a success, and shifted the Australian public perception that environmental issues were no longer the exclusive domain of smelly, dreadlocked hippies. To thousands of Australians, conservation and wilderness protection were suddenly a vote-worthy issue, with even Australian business icon Dick Smith getting involved in a spot of civil disobedience. In late 1982, the UNESCO committee in Paris announced the Tasmanian Wild Rivers as a World Heritage Area. Back in Tasmania, Bob Brown commenced a blockade of the construction site. Within days, this swelled to over 2,500 people from both Tasmania and abroad. The protests intensified, and in January 1983, there were up to 50 people arriving at the blockade per day. A month later, an enormous protest of 20,000 people marched through the streets of Hobart, and to make matters worse for the state government, celebrities and public figures were getting involved. Folk rock band Red Gum wrote a song about the situation, and British TV personality and botanist David Bellamy was detained. Over 1,200 people had been arrested for participation in the protests. International supporters were gradually getting bored, and the state government showed no signs of halting progress. For those protesting the dam, the chips were down. But with 1983 came a federal election and the fiercely anti-dam leader of the Labor Party, Bob Hawke. The polls were held and the votes gathered. Mother of God. They'd crushed it. The Labor Party had been elected, and finally that pesky Tasmanian state government could be made to stop building that awful dam.
This needs to stop now.
True to his word, Prime Minister Hawke immediately passed regulations under the National Parks and Wildlife Conservation Act.
That will show them.
The Tasmanian government did nothing and simply ignored the regulations and continued construction of the dam.
Right, if regulation isn't enough, maybe this will do the trick.
The Prime Minister then passed the World Heritage Properties Conservation Act, which explicitly prohibited clearing, excavation and construction in the Franklin River region. The Tasmanian government did nothing and simply ignored this new act and continued construction of the dam. Prime Minister Hawke was furious. The federal government was out of moves, left with no choice but to refer the matter to the High Court of Australia. Their goal? Request a Commonwealth injunction against the Tasmanian state government. But to do so, they would need evidence that the state was ignoring the existing and new policy.
How can we prove these fucking Tasmanians are still building that bloody dam?
And it was at this moment that Attorney General Gareth Evans had a brilliant idea.
Hello, 6th Squadron Ops Room, Captain Robert speaking, sir.
Captain, it's the AG. What have we got in the way of spy planes?
Well, sir, currently we utilise the Mirage 3 fighter and the RF-111C. It's a converted bomber equipped with an infrared sensor. I would strongly recommend using...
Yeah, no, perfect. Good, great. Whatever the first one was, use that. Raj, sounds sick. Listen, Captain, I'm going to need a flyover of Tasmania. That bloody dam is a pain in the neck. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Sir, is that legal? Conducting domestic aerial surveillance of Australian citizens?
Yeah, no, Captain, listen. I'm the AG. Trust me, it's going to be sick. Send them tomorrow.
The next day, on the 7th of April 1983, a Royal Australian Air Force Mirage fighter departed on a reconnaissance flight. Its mission? To gather imagery of the Franklin Dam construction site. In its low-altitude flyover of the site, the Mirage was spotted by protesters, construction workers, and Tasmanian government officials and police. More embarrassingly, the mission failed in its primary goal of acquiring useful photographic evidence that the federal government desperately needed for its Commonwealth injunction.
Hello, is this the AG's office? Yes, I was perhaps wondering if he could explain why there is a combat aircraft flying over our dam. Look, mate, I've got no idea what you're talking about.
The Attorney General was furious.
Hello, 6th Squadron Ops Room, Captain Robert speaking.
Roberts, what the fuck was that? Not only didn't you get any photos, but the plane was spotted.
Sir, the Mirage is a fighter. The RF-111C is the better platform.
Oh, for heaven's sake, Roberts, spare me the details. Just send the other one immediately, and get me those photographs.
The very next day, a single RF-111C departed RAF Base Amberley in Queensland. Unlike the Mirage from the day prior, the F-111 swept through the Tasmanian sky at a lofty 30,000 feet. At this altitude, the aircraft avoided the watchful gaze of the protesters and officials below. It managed to complete its mission. The junior Air Force officer who had approved the flights had done so on the assurance that the Minister for Defence had endorsed them and that a formal written request was to follow. But this was an outright lie, and to further stoke the fires of scandal, leaked internal Air Force signals later demonstrated the shady nature of the whole operation.
Photography to show extent of work carried out at dam site. Aircraft should attract as little attention as possible.
The Attorney General had bypassed Prime Ministerial approval, outright ignored the Minister for Defence, and undermined the Chief of Defence Force. In doing so, however, he now had the visual evidence required for the High Court injunction. But not everything had gone to plan. Within days, the Defence Minister, Chief of Defence, and the public were wise to the whole plot. The Minister for Defence was furious. The Chief of Defence was furious. The public were furious. The Attorney General of Australia, Gareth Evans, was in deep shit. Or was he? During a press conference, the Prime Minister Bob Hawke was grilled regarding the move.
Now look, Gareth is a remarkable minister, extraordinarily able and hard-working. But all who know Gareth know that he has got a rather dramatic and compulsive streak about him.
Compulsive, indeed. For his crimes, the AG was charged with misappropriation of defence assets and sentenced to 5 years detention for what was described as an obscene overreach of the federal surveillance apparatus used to spy on citizens. Except that didn't happen, because this is, of course, Australia. Instead, the AG merely faced media scrutiny and eventually fronted a horde of journalists on national news.
Minister Evans, why did you use a spy plane on your own people?
Look, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Attorney General Gareth Evans avoided all and any legal or administrative action of any kind. The worst punishment he faced was earning the nickname of Biggles, after the fictional pilot and adventurer of the same name. Behind the scenes, the case was brought to the High Court on the 31st of May 1983. The Defence Minister firmly insisted the photographs from the mission not be admitted as evidence, or as a compromise that the Tasmanian government should also be made privy to the imagery. In what became known as the Commonwealth vs Tasmania, the state government argued the federal regulations and legislation were unconstitutional. In response, the federal government successfully argued that they were fulfilling their responsibilities under the International UNESCO Treaty. In a landmark decision on the 1st of July 1983, the judges ruled 4-3 in favour of the federal government. The battle for the Franklin River Dam was over. The Franklin River Dam controversy was a culturally significant moment in Australian history. It fundamentally altered perception regarding environmental issues and demonstrated to many the importance of ecological preservation. The use of Air Force surveillance assets on the public was also viewed as an egregious use of surveillance powers, a subject which in recent times is once again topical to the Australian public. The F-111 went on to serve the Air Force until 2010, at which time Australia was the only nation still operating the aircraft. While they saw brief operational use in East Timor, their employment in the Franklin River Dam scandal remains the most notorious and enduring legacy of the platform. Until the next video, thank you for the gift of your time.